Welcome to The Essential Element, the Elements of Education podcast. I'm your host, Christian Page. We're grateful that you're choosing to spend your time with us. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're choosing to be here. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Michael. Michael's the board president for Elements of Education. Michael also wears a couple of different hats in our community, has been an internship host before, and talks a lot about building your strengths and why he stuck around for the past 20 years as we've been trying to change the face of education. So without further ado, here's a conversation with our board president, Michael.
Our school, we really believe in relationships, and that is emphasized through mentor group. And so I wholeheartedly believe in that.
What do they need? I have to be able to answer that question. And that takes a little bit of time.
The biggest teacher, I think, is failure. The brain works in failure. And those failures are actually synapses rewiring themselves in your brain.
And think about where you want to be. Because when you find your place, you find your people. And our purpose is attached to people.
You know, when there's a phenomenal teacher, when there's a phenomenal educator, when there's a phenomenal mentor, one of the mistakes that we make is we make it look too easy. Like, everyone sees the shining moment on stage. No one sees, right, like the hard time spent. All right. Welcome to The Essential Element, the Elements of Education podcast. My name is Christian Page, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today. We have my partner in crime, Zach, who you all are familiar with, and we have a special guest who wears many hats around our community, but comes to Elements as the board president. And so Michael is going to be joining us today. Michael, welcome. Thank you for spending your time with us. And ask every guest who comes on the show, right? Because I think that there's always interesting stories when it comes to Sammy, SOTA, and Idea. Tell us a bit about who you are and how you found yourself here in this story of Elements as we know it.
Yeah. So I've always been doing school design as an architect my whole career. And it's always been a search for how can we create places that are more humane, that nurture a young person into the world. And got wind of this idea of a school of the arts back in, 20 some years ago, right? And it was just an idea at that time. And the group of people in the community John invited him around the table and we talked about what it could be. And a few years later, we're interviewing some students. And it was a really powerful experience, interviewing the students and the parents about, I don't fit in at my high school. Or I don't see a pathway for myself. I'm a creative person and I just know how to nurture that. I don't want to be in this big place. I'm unseen. And parents wanting something really great for their child who is having a struggle. And then to watch these same people come alive, over those years. It was just an experiment at the beginning, right? 100 and some kids and teachers who it was not even a place made for it. It was all rented. It was in this building right here, that all started. And so to see those first graduates, and now some of those graduates now they're on the Elements board, and they're back teaching in the schools 20 years later, and then all of the innovation that's happened since then. We can talk more about that. But for me, being a part of this and the culture and watching what works right in education and bringing young people into the world and into themselves, it makes me think differently about how I have conversations with teachers in other communities and administrators in other communities about what school could be, right? And we get to do a little nudge. But here's a great example of what's really good. That's how I see it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Observation is that no one does something for 20 years that they don't like unless it's a bad habit. Right? And
you could argue that education is a bad habit.
Is it a bad habit?
Just working in education. I'm sorry.
The institution.
There you go.
Yeah, but not what you're about. Yeah.
No, some things to work on, some things to change, and not what you're about, I think, is the question that I'm looking to ask, right? Yeah. Somebody doesn't stay around something for 20 years. You don't keep showing up on Monday. You don't keep answering the phone. You don't keep responding to the emails unless there's something special that's brewing or something that you feel connected to. Mm-hmm. And I guess in a succinct fashion, like what has you continuing to come back and be in service from the inception of the idea 20 some odd years ago? What has you continuing to come back and be here?
Yeah, there's so many things, but the first thing that comes to mind is the people. The people who choose to be part of this model of education, it's not easy. I know that. As a teacher, you're coming into a paradigm that you weren't trained for. But at the same time, there are people who are looking to make a greater impact on young people. I think that's a common theme. And for me, it's just being around incredible people is really motivating to me, right? To see how Elements continues to infuse itself. The partner schools continue to infuse themselves in community in so many ways with all the different partnerships that students have internships. They're working on projects. We're involving partner agencies and projects for students. And the teachers are dreaming some of these things up. Elements is there to say, okay, let's try and make it happen. So, it's changing education, and I wish everybody else in the world knew as much about it as what I've gotten to experience the last 20 years. And it's just hard to break down the inertia, right, of institutions. And so your research, Zach, was pretty insightful about what are those elements that break down the inertia too. And so I appreciated you need an advocate out there. And I think that Elements has been sort of that front public community face to get up against the institution and say, no, we want this to happen. And there was some of that at the beginning because it was scary, it was risky, and you have these kids' lives in your hands. You know, if it went horribly wrong, they lose a year of their lives in education, right? And so, and nobody wants to take that risk, but the early people did. And so we have so much more to show for it now.
I think part of the reason organizations like Elements are so important in helping shape our three schools, and really, I think any public institution needs that outside support because there is so many pressures that force ways of thinking that education should be. Right. And the reason I bring that up is I think quite often our education system across the United States really focuses on a deficit model, looking at students based on what they don't have, what they're not achieving, and how we need to fix that, instead of identifying strengths that students have and finding ways to develop those strengths or guide them into pathways that nurture who they are and help them grow. And it is a tricky dance because it's also important to identify your weaknesses or gaps. I mean, part of education is knowing what do I need to get better at. So there's definitely, it's not that should never be talked about. I just feel like education feels so much of a pressure around fixing deficits instead of identifying strengths, that it needs an outside advocate to say it doesn't have to look like that. It could be different.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things that have been put in place by the schools, Elements, like the internship programs, the next move, right? Or mentorships, or the adjunct artists. In the beginning, I was thinking about this, you know, that you're bringing the real world into the school, you're bringing the school into the real world. You know, all these students are on the streets. And that was a big thing back then. And now it kind of works. And John was saying way back when, all these schools, a typical school is apart from community. You're on your own site, you got your fence out front, and you're apart. And a teacher, they're apart from community all day long in their four walls. I've talked to teachers where I've never really collaborated with my peers in my career. That's not real world. That's artificial.
Yeah.
You know, and then the institution says, well, let's look at the students' deficits and you work on those, right? And that's the model where here, because a student gets to meet an artist, a poet, a scientist, you know, and that might spark a passion. It's like, I could be good at that. There you're drawing your strengths out. And I think that the people who are invited to teach here alongside all these other adjuncts, they're genuinely people who have a passion for something and they can put that into the way they're teaching. And I think that's infectious for students too.
Yeah. And I think we have such a short-sighted view of what it looks like to develop strengths. I'm going to tell a story. One of our adjuncts, Jason Bomber, who I think you met at the event a couple weeks ago. Jason is a physicist, worked for Boeing for, I think, 15 years, started a company that designed the software around simulation for engineers. He ended up selling that company to this very large multi-billion-dollar company. And now he works with some of the biggest engineering firms in the country, from Apple and Google to SpaceX. And he advises them and helps them build models on how to simulate the problems they're trying to solve. He's one of the smartest people I know. And if you ask him about his educational journey, he played in a band in high school, was like a, A and B student, went to college, no idea what to do. He was a theater major, studying theater, and was failing all of his classes and barely staying in school. He went to the counselor, the guidance counselor, whatever, and they said, well, you need to take a science class. So he took astronomy, and he was like, whatever. And he took astronomy and actually loved it, got an A in the class for his first ever A in college. And then found, wow, I actually really love science. And it's the physics that's really interesting to me. And so he went back to the guidance counselor. He said, this is going to sound crazy. Can I switch my major to physics? And they're like, this is the first ever. Most people switch from physics to theater, not the other way around. And so he said, no, I'm really interested. Ended up graduating with a degree in physics, got a master's degree. And now he's like one of the most successful engineers I know. But it didn't come till way later in life. And he had an opportunity to explore that strength. I wonder if someone like that had been given a chance to look at something different and experience something different earlier on, the kind of passion it would inspire, and wouldn't have to wait until you were, and sometimes you do have to wait. But I think having that longer view of how you develop someone's strengths, you don't know what that turns into. But in education, we're focused on when you turn 18, you need to have X amount of, or you need to have X score on a standardized test that demonstrates math proficiency, X score in reading, X score in writing. And our only job is to get you to that minimum benchmark. And after that, you're on your own. And to me, that is a very short-sighted view of developing strengths.
Yeah. Well, now there's no room to fail either.
Right.
You talk about the minimum credits to graduate. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the maximum you can earn.
Exactly.
Right. And the way the courses are structured,
Yep.
There is no minimum, there's no wiggle room. And so the way courses are structured in the partner schools is you've got extra credits, extra classes, extra opportunities to explore something. And maybe you weren't that good at it, but you tried, and that grade didn't need to count. I didn't need it. Right. And so that freedom to fail, to to innovate, to take a risk. I'm a theater guy and maybe I'll try science. What's up with that? So that's what's cool about these schools is you get that openness and freedom to try things out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it changes the relationship with the target, right? And I'm being nerdy because I've been reading this book called The Archer lately, which is really interesting, but it talks a lot about like becoming one with the target. And hold me in two hands really quickly, but I was at a workshop recently. Every year we go to the Black and Brown Youth Summit at Highline. And it's students from all up and down the five who come to a particular place. They go to Highline College. They hear from a world-renowned speaker or somebody of that nature, and then they have these workshops. And I was a guest in. My friend Aaron Reeder was leading a workshop. He works for the Seattle Theater Group now. And he was asking a series of questions. But I'm not sure if you all have ever seen Lencioni's model on the 6 essential questions that every team has to answer. But he was doing an individual version. So Lencioni models is based on business and why do we exist? How do we behave? How will we know if we've been successful? Who must do what? So on and so forth. Yeah. And was asking the students a series of questions around, well, what is my purpose? What value can I bring to my community? What what is it that I want to do ultimately? All of these things. And we're asking 14 to 18-year-old boys, right? And I was really upset in the room. I couldn't put my thumb on, right? Why I was so upset. But the conclusion that I came to is, and I said this in front of the room to the students, is if we're not intentional about answering these questions, there's a system that is waiting to answer them for you. Right. Wow. And will always point you in the direction of what is necessary, right? If I don't know how I've been successful or if I'm good, standards will tell you if you've met it. Standardized tests will also tell you, right? If I don't know what I want to do, I'm a physicist who's pretending to be a thespian, you know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with trying new things, but I think that there's something special here at the Element Schools of students picking their target, right? And then people aiding them on, well, how do I shoot on par to get where I said I wanted to go, as opposed to, right? Here are the two options that you have, whether that be college or career and technical education. Don't touch anything else. Don't look at anything else. As a matter of fact, we might track you into one of those two things, right? I think that there's just something special that exists here. And I think if I was to ask those questions in any of the classes that I've taught here, students would have answers to them. Mm-hmm. And that feels special.
One of the criticisms we often get, I don't know that it's necessarily criticism, but people will say, how are you supposed to expect 8th graders to know what they want to be or to pick a pathway? Each of the schools have kind of 2 pathways. At Sammy, there's like life and physical sciences. At SOTA, it's performing and visual arts. And then at IDEA, it's design and engineering. And students self-select into those schools at first in 8th grade. They say, wow, I really like the arts. I really like engineering. I really like, science and math. So they kind of pick this general sense of something that inspires them. And then as they go throughout their high school career, they kind of get more and more refined. And the criticism is, well, how are students at that age supposed to know what they want? Like, you should just provide a general education so that when they graduate, then later on in life, they can figure out what they want to do. And I understand that. Like, there's a certain amount of truth to that. I think the reason we explore pathways is not because we expect every performer at SOTA leaving to go into the performing arts, or every scientist at Sammy to go become a biologist, or every designer from IDEA to become, a UI UX designer. It's because by choosing a pathway down something that excites you, you learn how to explore something deeply and develop a strength or a passion that you have. And even if later in life you end up not pursuing that passion, you've been down that road before. You know what it's like to pursue a passion and to go deep into a field, to learn about it, and then use that same skill in whatever you choose to do.
Yeah, even if you go from theater to physics.
Even if you go from theater to physics, yeah.
But I think that happens in, sorry, Michael.
No, I think the act of giving somebody the power to choose.
Yeah.
Just that simple state, I have a choice. How empowered are young people otherwise in the education system? Mm-hmm. Okay, here are the classes you're going to take next semester. Hope you like them. Right? But we're giving you a pathway to choose. And then within that, you got more choices. Mm-hmm. And let's see how it goes. And you got interesting people to work with it. So, how it plays out. But I think the very start, that powerful gift of giving them a choice says, I have a stake in this now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's mine.
Yeah, exactly. So you've been an internship host before. Part of our, pathways is we have this experience for students to go be placed into an internship and explore something. And oftentimes it's, wow, this is now what I want to do for my life. And equally as important, sometimes it's, wow, I never want to do that again. Good thing I figured that out now.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. So what has your experience been as an internship host, working with high school kids? I know you've had a couple. Yeah. Tell us a story or just an experience around like helping some of those students develop their own strengths in the context of working in a business while they're in high school.
Yeah. Well, there's the story of Luis.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a good one.
Yeah, so I'll go through that. But then there's other things I could say about a number of other interns that we had in our office too. But Luis came to us. He was placed in a different setting, and they needed a Social Security number from him because he needed Boeing clearance to work at that place. Well, he didn't have a Social Security number. He was a DACA student. He was undocumented, and here he is in high school. And so he came to our place, and he was working on the forms he needed, and he wants to get to college, and you got to have certain certifications. And I guess he had already passed a deadline for one of them, and he lost his $500, that he already put the application fee in. Mm-hmm. So he had to get another $500, and he's working washing dishes after school. So Luis, he came into our office and he wanted to learn about architecture, and we had him building models, and he did some student workshops on the design of Sammy. Like, what do you all think? And took that back into the design. So it was really cool that he had a hand in that place. And fast forward all these years, he went through school at WSU in architecture. He's working in Leavenworth now, really good architecture firm, making his way. He and his wife just bought their first home. And he's got what he needs to be a citizen of the United States. Not full citizenship, but hopefully he's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just the character of that guy, of Luis, and his generous spirit and his persistence. I don't know if he could have, without the community that Sammy provided for him and the support, that's a person who is alive in the world and doing well today because of that. The other students we've had in our office, we tried to give them a project to work on. We try to give them a broad experience of the different aspects of the practice of architecture, because there's really technical stuff and there's really creative stuff, and they have to work together. And so a person will find their affinity in those. But if you got a project to work on, and oftentimes they'll present it to the whole staff at the end, which is really cool, because most of the young people that come through these schools have such poise in front of people. And I don't know what it is, but it's different. in the people who go through these schools. They're just their poise, their self-confidence. It's the preparation. Yeah. That Next Move program gives them a lot of preparation about coming into the professional environment. And so, yeah, so many, how is it now? 800 students in the Next Move program?
Oh, I mean, each year we do about 400 placements in the spring. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's just individual placements. And then there's also additional ones through education and then, bridge program, placing them in schools. And there's, and then beyond the bell, there's kind of a lot of different like subcategories now of internships that are kind of expanding out of just taking kids outside of the school and placing them around the community to be engaged in utilizing their strengths in different ways.
And that's what I mean about how these schools now are infused in community, right? It's changing Tacoma.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people you meet, like, oh yeah, my niece went there, or my granddaughter, or and or I did, and it was really good for me. And everyone else wishes they could have had a child go there. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was at King County Housing Authority recently, and that was the experience, right? They're like, I get off stage. Yeah. I was working up there. There was an individual, he lives in Proctor District. And I was talking about some things that I think would be normal in our spaces that maybe a little contentious in others. But I finish up, I get off stage, done addressing the staff there. And the individual comes up to me and says, "You're from Tacoma?" And I go, yeah. And he's like, "Well, where did you go to school?" And I tell him where I went to school. And he's like, "Well, where did you teach?" Because you had mentioned you were doing some of the, and I told him, he goes, "All 3 of my daughters went there." Right. It was like so proud of,
That's awesome.
the idea, but like for you to be able to see a pattern of thinking, right, that I think is critical, but is also necessary, right? And to immediately recognize that, like, no, you must have some connection to this space. I think is it's a hallmark, right? Like, it's a reputation that I think has been upheld here that is it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and that is the beauty and just my experience of working in education for now over 20 years. Like, you develop these relationships with kids every year that then go into the community and they become part of the community, and then they have kids. And I mean, there's so many times now we're getting kids coming to us whose parents graduated from the schools, which is just the craziest experience, whose siblings. And then like one day I walked outside and the mailman coming down my alley was like, "Zach," and it was a girl that I had in class. And like, they're everywhere. It's just one of the beauteous things that works, and that happens when you work in education for a long time, is you have these seeds that then flourish in the community, and you become really connected to what's happening. Would love to have you pontificate with us. Think about how does this happen in high school, especially when you have the expectations placed on teachers to develop students' strengths individually. It's a very individual process where, you have to be curious as a teacher. You have to get to know who every one of your students are. And if you have 150 kids on your caseload, that's 150 stories to learn and 150 separate conversations to have. It becomes unwieldy and unmanageable at a certain point. And that's what's being asked of teachers. It's a big lift to ask teachers to be that personally involved and not just put out a curriculum and collect tests and give feedback. Like, it's a lot more personal than that. How does maybe someone like yourself or people in the community help alleviate that burden and provide more connections so that it doesn't feel like the teacher is the only one responsible in a community for building adult relationships with kids?
You're saying outside of school, how do we do that?
Yeah, or I'm just saying, like, or how important is it to involve like your organization or internship hosts, or even, as you've been a part of these schools for 20 years, how do you bring community in to share some of that burden?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing that's changed here is that students or teachers aren't doing it alone.
Right.
And there's adjunct artists in the community, right? Mm-hmm. And so they'll partner in classes sometimes. I find that the staff here are much more collaborative than many places. And just that traditional paradigm of a teacher in a classroom with their 30 kids. How alone does that feel? How unsupported does that feel?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? How am I learning about new aspects of this, of math or foreign language or all these things, right? Whereas I'm working as a math teacher with an engineer, I'll see what concepts I've been teaching for the past 20 years. And if you can imagine over 20 years, the changes that would happen in the way math is applied.
Yeah.
Or even in theatrics, right? The meaning of a story changes as society changes.
Yeah.
It can be reinterpreted. And so that aliveness that's in there, or I'm just thinking now of working with the Puyallup tribe on the salmon hatcheries. For everybody, that's real. We have more salmon coming back because we tried this, right? And students are doing the science, they're monitoring it, and you're in connection with people outside school. It's just those walls, how we've set up our schools to be apart from community. And I remember back when we were interviewing students about the SAMI project, the one word that kept on coming up is community. It's like, okay, there's something to this.
Yeah.
They have that sense of belonging and they're part of something.
Yeah.
And so if the students are feeling it, I can imagine the teachers being alongside that. That's just an ethic. It's one of the tenets.
Yeah.
So I think that's some of the secret sauce. The mentorship program where students for 4 years. It's 150 names, but they're knowing each other too.
Yeah.
And when you got a senior talking to an incoming freshman, I don't have to set the rules.
Yeah.
They've got them down.
Yeah.
Right? You're not doing it alone. And just the idea of students and teachers being partners in the enterprise is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
It's not the paradigm out there.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I had a bridge that pretty much saved my life.
Wow.
Right? Like I'm exaggerating all the way, but she was a student who took my class the first year that I taught here. The first semester that I taught, and we came back in the second one, and she told me, she didn't ask me, she said, I'm going to be a ridge. All right. But there were just some changes in the back end system. And then also, there was a lot of difficult things that were happening. We're on just coming out of COVID, we're, back in the classroom and still have masks and don't know if the next day is going to be the day where they send us back out and all these different things, but really helping with the back end of operating Schoology, or if there were freshman students or underclassmen who were in our class, just taking them under her wing. And I don't think that I've ever been in an education space where in colleges you have, your professor, and then there's an assistant professor or student professor who's getting their master's degree, and it feels the same. But I think that is a special partnership between teacher and student that allows student to take on a significant leadership role. And now I'm, watching her journey. I mean, we're still connected, and she's at Pacific Lutheran University and is a student leader there, right? Alongside two other students who were in my creative writing class. But I think that I did not feel alone as someone who was in their second semester of teaching here, right? Not because the adults took me under their wing, but because a group of students said, "Oh, don't worry, we got you." And I'm I don't know where else that.
That level of ownership of students saying, "Hey, this is our community. This is what we're a part of. This is what we believe. Let's bring you into that," really frees up the teacher to not have to do that work. It's more work up front. Speaking as someone I was a mentor for 8 years. It was a lot of work in the first 2 years to develop that with your juniors and seniors and to raise up leaders, but then you empower them and then they're doing the work for you and you're just checking in and monitoring. It becomes self-sustaining and kids take ownership of it. It becomes theirs. They own it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just sitting here thinking about the humanity of all this.
Yeah.
The basic, genuine, wonderful humanity.
Yeah.
That comes alive through all the ideas that are put in place here.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the heart of it. Yeah.
Michael, can I bring you back to something that you said earlier?
Sure.
And this is, I would start this sentence with "forgive me," but I don't think I need forgiveness in this situation. I think that there are some times where there's a mentor-based relationship. And you were talking about the internship program and Luis.
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which I appreciate you, even when you spoke about the other students, one of the ways that I appreciate in which you told the story is that it was not you taking credit for where those people have landed. Right. But an understanding of the strength that they brought to, and then you coming alongside them, right, with direction or some type of support.
I'm also inspired by them. Anytime you meet a good human being, that rubs off.
Yeah.
And I like to just collect it.
Yeah.
Soak it in. Yeah. And so, and particularly in Luis's situation, a person who's got that courage. Yeah. And so you're right. If you're in a space where you have the vision and the openness to see the strength of other individuals, and it takes some putting yourself aside, which is hard in daily life. It's easy to be pretty self-centered. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why I like coming into this space. I'm inside of SOTA SOTA right now. It's selfless. So much selflessness. Yeah. And then you see the richness that comes out of that, in the work they're creating, the enthusiasm for it, the curiosity, the vibrancy of people, all these young people. Yeah. It's still contained in these walls. Yeah. So, hopefully it's making a better community. I think that's one thing for Elements now is how can we better get all this good stuff out into the broader community, and then have the broader community say, wow, this has been going on for 20 years. There's evidence now, so much evidence in all the human people that we've been talking about, evidence that the system works right, and I think the schools have done a good job of saying, yeah, we think we have it down, right, with mentorship programs. Next move, we're codifying those processes, that were just a while back an idea, and we need to keep innovating and cultivating new ideas. And that's what Elements is about, because we've worked it now that it can be more part of the system. Those things that were just 20 years ago an idea, or 10 years ago an idea, what's next, right? And so I like the idea of getting some of the high school students into the middle schools, and that's going to just maybe change some paradigms there too. But high school teachers and middle school teachers, high school administrators and middle school administrators.
And part of that, of what I love, is it's this idea of if you love something enough, you give it away and see where it goes. And I think we've created something really powerful with 3 schools that started with 173 students in the fall of 2001, that now, December of 2023, there's almost 1,700 kids that are participating at any one time in this program, plus all the students that then we serve through, middle school partnerships and internships and through Club Beyond. Just continuing to give it away and seeing what happens to it so that you can help see it grow. I think that's like the next chapter of the story of what Elements of Education and these schools have done. Yeah.
And there's more, it's probably easier for them to choose.
Yeah.
Because it's not a blind choice anymore. The other schools in the community, I was thinking, going back to that thing about choice.
Yeah.
You give it away, they have to choose to take it.
Yeah,
run with it,
exactly. Yeah.
Right? And there's no power if they don't.
Yeah.
If you say, thou shalt do this, you've taken away their power to choose to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the next step.
Definitely.
Offer the choice more often. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, Michael, we appreciate you. I think one for, holding a leadership position here, but also being committed to this for such a long time. Also appreciate you for taking some time to spend with us today and to talk about some of these big ideas that are on the table. So a significant amount of gratitude to you. Thank you for spending your time with us, and thank you for choosing to accept the gift that we've been giving away, but thank you for choosing to be with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Elements of Education is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Tacoma, Washington, dedicated to changing public education to better serve the specific and diverse needs of students in our public schools. For more information about how you can support the work that we do, please visit elementsofed.org, or you can find us on Instagram at Elements of Education, or on our website,